I'm Marilyn Harper, 34 years old, and the day I drove home to tell my parents I'd lost my job, I found my suitcase already packed on the porch. The screen door creaked open as I stepped up. And there it was, my name, written in Sharpie on every box, like they were labeling something to be thrown out. Not one person came to greet me, not even my mother, who used to warm my hands with hers after winter bus rides. The hall smelled like lemon cleaner and silence, and when I stepped inside, my father said 5 words that ended everything. I thought I knew about love before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever given more than you got back. I was born and raised in a quiet town outside Richmond, Virginia, 2-story house with green shutters and a front lawn. My sister and I used to rake in the fall. Daddy worked with his hands painting houses, fixing fences. Sometimes odd jobs, and Mom stayed home most years. She used to sing while folding laundry. Little old hymns her grandmother taught her. We didn't have much money, but we always had order chores done before cartoons. Grace, before dinner. Doors locked, before dark. It was the kind of life where you learned early not to ask for too much. Just be grateful and do your part. I did more than my part when Mom got sick in my late 20s and the bills started stacking up. I moved back home, gave up my apartment in Arlington, took over the mortgage paid off, late utilities, helped my sister Chelsea enroll in her online program. I even bought groceries and covered Mom's medications whenever insurance didn't stretch far enough. Chelsea liked to joke that I was the third parent, but only when it suited her. She had a way of floating through life, all sunshine and selfies, while I kept the lights on behind her that morning. I had come home to tell them something simple but hard. I'd been laid off my company, cut 37 positions, and mine was one of them. I had enough, saved to stay afloat for a little while, just needed space. A little time, maybe a few kind words instead. I walked through the front door and saw cardboard boxes by the stairs. My coat already folded on top. My name spelled out across the tape, like it didn't belong there anymore. Dad was crouched beside a box taping it shut, not even looking up when he said it. "You've worn out your welcome." I stood there still holding my keys, heart thudding like I'd missed a step on the stairs. Mom sat at the dining table, holding a chipped tea mug, her eyes on the wood grain, like it was more interesting than me and Chelsea. Blonde hair tucked behind one ear, curled up on the couch in pajama pants, scrolling her phone like nothing was happening. I asked if it was a joke. Nobody laughed. Dad just stood straight and said it again. Long enough, my voice came out low. "I pay the mortgage, you paid it," he said past tense. "We're managing now." But I'd seen the bank notices last week, the envelope tucked under the fruit bowl, and the way Mom winced when I mentioned her insulin. I asked if they were really kicking me out, and Dad said I could stay with a friend. I was resourceful, so I packed a bag. Just the essentials, laptop, a few clothes, the little ceramic turtle I made in 2nd grade art class, and left the rest. I brushed the door frame on the way out where the pencil marks still showed my height at age 11, 13, 16. And I told myself not to look back. I didn't cry. Not then. I walked straight to my car, drove through back roads until I got to Maxine's house. And when she opened the door, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into the kind of hug that makes you realize how long you've been holding your breath. I told her everything, and she just nodded, handed me tea, and said, "The guest room was mine for as long as I needed." She said one more thing before she turned in for the night. "Rest first, tomorrow. We figure out the rest." And I lay there, in her spare room, watching the shadows move across the ceiling, thinking about what my father said, "You've worn out your welcome?" I didn't know it yet, but those words would become the line I never crossed again. Maxine's basement was always a little cold, but that night it felt like a safe harbor. Concrete floors, mismatched rugs, a futon that dipped in the middle, and a tiny space heater humming in the corner. She handed me a heavy sweatshirt and a pair of socks that didn't match, then sat cross-legged on the floor with 2 glasses and a half bottle of wine. We didn't talk right away. I think she knew I needed a minute to feel the silence to understand what had just happened. When I finally spoke, my voice sounded distant. I told her everything from the boxes stacked in the hallway to Chelsea's faint laugh when I walked past her. Maxine didn't interrupt. She let me say it all in one long thread, like pulling a knot loose. The part that stuck the most was how my mother wouldn't look at me. Not once. Not when I walked in. Not when I said I paid the mortgage. Not even when I asked if they were really kicking me out. I kept going about the groceries, the prescriptions, the late utility bills I covered without being asked. About Chelsea's tuition, her books, her phone bills. I said it all, like I was trying to convince someone I existed. Maxine just nodded, poured more wine, and said quietly, "You've been financing your own erasure." Then she tilted her head and added, "They didn't even argue. Just packed your things like you were a tenant whose lease ran out." I stared at the floor. That was exactly it. No tears, no discussion. Just, "You've worn out your welcome." I was still trying to decide if that hurt more than being cut off. We stayed up until after 1, her back against the wall, mine curled under a throw blanket. When the wine ran out, she brought me a glass of water and said, "Phase 1 is rest. No more paying for things that aren't yours. No calls, no bills, no reaching out. That door is shut now." I nodded, but it didn't feel real yet. I didn't sleep much. The futon was firm and my mind was full, but I wasn't crying. Not anymore. I stared up at the ceiling and remembered things I hadn't thought about in years. Like how Mom always made cookies with Chelsea when I wasn't home, saying I made too much mess. Or how Dad once told me to pay Chelsea's parking ticket because I was the responsible one. In the morning, Maxine made coffee in her tiny kitchen and handed me a chipped mug that said, "Handle with care." She told me to cancel anything I was still on: credit cards, insurance, utilities, anything shared. I pulled out my laptop and started checking accounts. One by one, I removed my name, closed things, changed passwords, called customer service lines, and waited on hold. By the time the sun dipped below the basement window, I'd pulled out of almost everything. It was exhausting and liberating all at once. A few days passed like that. Maxine worked mornings at the library, and I scoured job boards from her kitchen table. I applied for everything: customer service, admin work, data entry, anything that might stick. I didn't expect much, but I made a spreadsheet and tracked every application like it was a lottery ticket. And then it happened. A message popped up on a gray, rainy afternoon. A digital marketing firm in Richmond needed an operations coordinator. I barely remembered applying, but they wanted to schedule an interview. I clicked confirm before I could talk myself out of it. The interview was 2 days later. Maxine lent me a blazer, navy blue, one button missing, but still sharp. I pulled my hair back, dusted off my flats, and took the bus downtown. The office was tucked between a bakery and a yoga studio with wide glass windows and plants by the front door. Inside, the receptionist handed me a welcome badge and smiled like she meant it. The woman who interviewed me, Lena, had square glasses and a soft voice. She asked why I left my last job, and I told her it was restructuring and a few personal changes. I said I was ready to rebuild. She didn't press, just nodded like she understood more than she said. 3 days later, I got the offer. Full-time, real salary, health benefits. I stood in Maxine's kitchen with my phone in one hand and my other hand covering my mouth. When she got home and saw the look on my face, she didn't even ask. She just grabbed 2 glasses and opened a bottle of sparkling cider she'd been saving since Christmas. I started the following Monday. The office had skylights and break room tea, and the first day they handed me a canvas tote with the company logo and a mug that said, "You belong here." I almost cried in the break room. The work was steady, budgets, vendors, project timelines. My brain kicked back into gear like it had just been waiting for permission. On my 5th day, I met Arjun from Strategy. He asked if I was always this calm, or if it was just an act. I laughed and said, "You haven't seen me mislabel a spreadsheet yet." That Friday, I picked up keys to a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near the river. 1-bedroom, creaky floors, windows that opened. It smelled like lemon cleaner and new paint. Maxine helped me move in with 3 car trips and a borrowed hand truck. I bought a second-hand couch, a little kitchen table, and a thrift store lamp with a crooked shade. I strung up fairy lights, unpacked my mugs, and stood in the middle of the empty living room, whispering, "You're safe now." That night, curled under a faded quilt, I opened my laptop to check my bank account. My first paycheck had hit. It wasn't a fortune, but it was clean. No shared bills, no Venmo charges from Chelsea labeled thanks. Just mine. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened a new browser tab and began removing myself from the last few things that tied me to them. Certified letters, official forms, updated addresses. I even filed a request to remove my name from the family's shared health insurance plan. That part hurt a little. Not because I needed it, but because I remembered the day Mom asked me to join it. Said it would help everyone if we pooled costs. She had smiled when she said it, like it meant we were a team. 2 days later, a message came through from an unknown number. A photo of a mortgage past due notice. No greeting. Just the words, "Thought you were responsible." I didn't reply. I made tea instead and sat by the window watching the river. The current moved slow and steady. That felt like enough. 6 weeks later, Lena called me into her office and offered me a raise. Said they were adjusting salaries and mine was long overdue. I thanked her and walked out feeling something I hadn't in a long time seen. That Friday, Maxine and I sat in our usual corner booth at the wine bar down the street. I told her about the raise, and she clapped so loudly the bartender chuckled. She raised her glass and said, "Now burn the rest. Every link, every last thread they've got on you." I nodded. I already had. That weekend I shredded the last stack of mail that had followed me from their house. Credit card offers, donation requests, tax forms with my name and their address. I filed the ones I needed, burned the rest. The next step was official. Legal documents. Removing my parents' house as my permanent residence. Canceling the old family credit card my mother opened in my name when I was 22. Updating my emergency contact to Maxine. It felt like breathing, like the kind of peace that doesn't need explaining. I spent Sunday morning walking the trail by the river, just watching the water carry everything forward. Back home, I stirred pasta sauce on the stove while Maxine uncorked a bottle of wine that actually needed a corkscrew. We toasted to fresh starts. I don't remember what we said after that, but I remember how it felt like nothing was missing. Then, Monday morning came with something unexpected. A letter in my mailbox. No return address. Handwritten. Inside was Chelsea's handwriting, familiar loops and flourishes. "You owe us rent, food, shelter, years of support." No signature. Just a list of bank transactions marked with question marks. My own contributions, twisted into accusations. I held the paper for a moment, hands steady. Then I opened a folder on my laptop and labeled it defense. If they were coming for me, they weren't going to find a helpless girl anymore. They were going to find records and a lawyer. And I already knew who to call. The binder I kept on my kitchen shelf was a simple black one, nothing fancy. Inside it, I slipped the handwritten note Chelsea had dropped through my door, the fake invoice for rent, food, car use, $42,000 worth of invented debts. She'd written it on lined notebook paper like it was a class assignment, signed it with a threat, "If you don't pay, we'll get a lawyer." I added it to the growing stack, printed copies of my Venmo payments, screenshots of the utility bills, records of every mortgage draft pulled from my account. That morning, I called Angela Lee. Her name had come to me quickly, almost without thinking, but once I heard her voice measured calm, direct, I knew I'd found the right person. Angela Lee Family Law. She answered. How can I help? I told her I needed protection from my own family. 2 days later, I sat across from her in a quiet office painted the same soft gray as the sky outside. A bookshelf ran the full wall behind her desk, filled with case books and neat rows of labeled binders. She didn't waste time. Let's start with what you've got, she said, sliding a yellow legal pad toward her. I handed her the binder. She flipped through the documents, pausing now and then to underline something or scribble a note. How long have you been financially supporting them? She asked. I was 25 when I moved back in, I said. I've paid more than $70,000, total mortgage, groceries, utilities, Chelsea's school fees. Angela tapped the table with her pen. And now they're demanding money from you. I nodded. She didn't blink. You have grounds not only to protect yourself, but to pursue repayment. She began drafting a formal response that same afternoon. A cease and desist for harassment. A summary of my contributions backed by receipts. A statement outlining the debts I had covered without full consent. Chelsea's student loans among them, silently added to my autopay because she couldn't remember her login. Angela's voice didn't rise once. You've enabled them for too long, she said, flipping to a new page. It's time they learned where the line is. You're not just their daughter, April. You're their creditor. That night, I sat in my apartment and read through the messages they'd sent me over the years. The quiet guilt trips, the subtle demands, the emergencies that never quite seemed real. I let myself feel it, not the sadness, but the slow building weight of all those moments. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was gathering. Angela mailed the legal packet on a Monday morning. Certified, priority, everything trackable. Inside were the cease and desist, a full financial breakdown, and a demand for repayment totaling $31,480. There was no emotion in the language, just clean, factual lines. The last page held a warning: if they continued harassing me or failed to respond, we'd escalate. And then came silence. No more texts. No more blocked calls. Even the usual anonymous comments Chelsea used to leave on my old posts stopped. It should have felt like peace. It didn't. It felt like a storm waiting just behind the clouds. I went to work, kept my head down, joined coffee runs, organized campaigns, filed reports. I walked home in the evenings along the river trail past restaurants with warm lights and couples walking dogs. I focused where I could, smiled when I had to. But every time I reached my front door, I half expected someone to be standing there. 5 days passed. Snow dusted the sidewalks that Friday morning. I paused at the edge of the bridge, watching the river flow beneath thin sheets of ice. My phone buzzed just before lunch. Angela, they signed for the letter 3 days ago, she said. Still no response. I asked if that was a good sign. She paused. It's often the quiet ones who erupt. Be alert. That evening I stopped at a pharmacy on my way home, bought pepper spray, saved the local precinct's non-emergency number in my favorites. I wasn't scared. I was done being caught off guard. 3 nights later, it happened. A fist hit my door, not a knock, a pounding. Over and over. I didn't need to look. I knew that rhythm. My father. I grabbed my phone, thumb shaking as I hit record, then stepped toward the door, but didn't open it. His voice boomed through the wood. April. Come out here right now. I didn't answer. You think you can sue your own family? He shouted. You ungrateful girl. After everything we did for you. Behind him, I heard my mother's voice, muffled, trying to pull him back. You didn't pay for anything, he yelled. That was charity. You were never even... Then he stopped. Silence. I stood still. He hadn't finished the sentence, but the damage was done. "You think you're better than us now," he said finally. "With your lawyer, your apartment, your job? You're not. You never were. That was enough. I called the police." 2 officers arrived within minutes. They asked me to stay inside. I handed them my phone with the recording. Through the peephole, I watched them talk to my father, his face red and wild, my mother beside him like a shadow. They left in a squad car, not arrested, just removed. One officer came back to return my phone. He spoke gently. "You did the right thing," he said. "You might want to consider a restraining order." I nodded. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the dent in the door where his fist had landed. For a long time, I felt nothing. Then something settled. Not fear, not heartbreak, just understanding. They were never going to see me for who I was. Not as a daughter, not as a helper, not even as a person. Angela called the next morning. "His outburst just gave us something valuable," she said. "We have it recorded. He denied every payment. That opens the door for discovery." She explained how we could now request financial records, how we could trace everything. "He made a mistake," she added, "and we're going to use it." We met that afternoon. Angela stood at her whiteboard drawing timelines, dollar signs, names. She pulled a document from a file drawer and handed it to me. "This," she said, "doesn't belong. It was an old bank statement, a payment to Southeastern Lending Group marked as a second mortgage. This was processed 18 months ago," she said. "Did you authorize this?" I looked at the number. I didn't even recognize the lender. "No," I said. "Absolutely not." She made a call while I sat in silence. 20 minutes later, we had the loan paperwork on her screen. PDFs with digital signatures. Notarizations, income statements, and there it was. My name. My signature. Only it wasn't mine. Angela turned the monitor so I could see. "This is fraud," she said. "He forged your signature. He used your information from old documents, Social Security, employment history. This isn't a dispute anymore, April. This is a felony." I leaned closer. The J in Jensen was too high. The tail on the A curled too long. It was close, but not mine. I knew my handwriting. Every loop, every pressure mark. It was wrong. Angela began the process that same hour. We filed a dispute with the lender, froze any associated activity. She contacted the credit bureaus and began drafting an affidavit for the police. "We're moving this to the criminal side," she said. "Be prepared. This might escalate." I nodded. "Let it." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with every document I had and spread them across the surface. I went through them line by line, found 2 more charges, one a medical loan, the other a cash-out refinance from 4 years earlier. Both in my name, both signed with the same forged script. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. I met Maxine for coffee the next morning and told her everything. She didn't say much, just held her mug between both hands, then whispered, "He used your name to build his lie." I nodded. Angela added the forged documents to our legal file and contacted the state attorney general's office. The investigation was officially criminal now. 2 days later, a detective called. His voice was calm but clipped. "We're opening a file," he said. "If the evidence holds, your father may be facing charges." I thanked him and hung up. Then I looked out the window. The street below was quiet. A few kids ran past in winter coats laughing. For a second, I remembered what it was like to believe your parents would always protect you. I knew better now. Sometimes survival means facing the truth, and sometimes it means exposing the very roots you came from. The courthouse wasn't what I expected. just a plain brick building with narrow windows and a parking lot that wrapped around the side. Inside, everything was quiet and clean, the kind of silence that made you walk a little slower. Angela walked beside me, her heels soft against the tile. She didn't say much, just pointed me toward security and nodded when I looked over. Once we were through, we waited in a smaller room than I'd imagined, just a few benches, beige walls, and a faint humming from overhead lights. It didn't look like the kind of place where everything might change. Across the aisle, I saw them. My father walked in first, wearing a suit that hung looser than I remembered. He was flanked by a man in a stiff gray jacket, the kind of attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. My mother followed behind, her head low, clutching her bag like she didn't know what to do with her hands. Neither of them looked at me. The hearing was only procedural. A review to present the initial documents and confirm the investigation. Angela had a binder ready and opened it as soon as we were called forward. She stood when the judge asked for our side and spoke clearly, each word steady and deliberate. "These signatures," she said, motioning to the screen the clerk had connected to her laptop, "do not match Ms. Harper's verified legal signature. Furthermore, the loan documents were executed without her consent. All funds were deposited into accounts solely controlled by Edward Harper." The other attorney raised an objection, said they hadn't had enough time to verify the information. Angela didn't flinch. "We've already submitted these records to the district attorney's office. A police investigation is underway. My client is not here to argue perception. She is here because her name and identity were used without her permission." There was a pause, a shift in the room like something subtle had cracked. I looked at my father. His jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but there was a flicker barely visible, just enough to feel. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Given the seriousness of the allegations and the documentation presented," he said, "this case will be referred for further review." We stood and left the courtroom without a word. Outside, the wind had picked up. I pulled my coat tighter. We were halfway across the parking lot when I heard his voice. "Marilyn." "Wait." I turned. My father stood a few paces behind us. His expression was different, less sharp, more uncertain. His hands were in his coat pockets, but his shoulders were tight. "You think I meant for this to happen?" he said. "I didn't plan for it to get this far. I needed to protect what we had left." I didn't answer right away. Angela stood a step behind me, watching. "You mean your lies?" I asked. He didn't speak for a long moment. Then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. My mother stood beside him. Her face was pale, eyes rimmed red. She didn't look at me, just at the sidewalk. "You have any idea what this cost me?" I asked. "The debt. The credit damage. The nights I spent sleeping in Maxine's basement after you locked me out of a house I was paying for." My father's eyes lowered. Then softly he said, "You were never your mother's daughter." The words came out low, almost too quiet to catch. I froze. "What?" He looked up, then glanced at my mother and back at me. "Gloria, she's not your biological mother. She never was. I met her when you were about 2. Your real mother, her name was Eliza. She passed away. Fast. Cancer. You were just a toddler." The cold air felt sharper suddenly. I stepped back without meaning to. "Gloria raised you, but she never really connected with you. Not like she did with Chelsea. I knew it. I saw it. But I thought if I just kept everything steady, if I paid the bills, if I made it all look normal, it would be okay." "You let her treat me like I didn't belong," I said quietly. He didn't respond right away. Then he said, "You always gave. You worked hard. You made things better. It made me look worse." He didn't try to explain the forged loan. He didn't try to make excuses. He just stood there in the wind, and for a second, he didn't look like my father. He looked like a man who had finally run out of things to hide behind. "I forgive you," I said. Not for him. I didn't say that part aloud. I said it so I could walk away without carrying his shame any longer. He opened his mouth, but I was already turning back toward Angela. She didn't ask if I was okay. Just unlocked the car, opened the passenger side door, and waited. I got in, and we pulled away from the courthouse without another word. That night, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the tight, anxious silence of waiting. It was something steadier. My apartment glowed soft with string lights, the heater ticking in the background. I poured a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table listening to the sound of nothing at all. There were no knocks on the door, no surprise texts, no new invoices slipped under the mat. Just space. And for the first time in years, that space felt safe. I took Maxine's advice and started therapy the next week. Her name was Dr. Sloan. Tall, calm hair pulled back neatly, hands folded in her lap. She asked gentle questions that didn't feel like tests. She listened like she wasn't waiting to reply. "Tell me the first time you remember being the helper," she said one morning. I answered without thinking. Age 9, Chelsea had the flu. I made her dinner, cleaned the kitchen, put her to bed. My parents were upstairs arguing. No one noticed she asked. "Just me," I said. She nodded. "But you noticed." We talked about how being strong can become a trap. How when people get used to your silence, they stop looking for your boundaries. Some days, I walked out of those sessions lighter. Other days, I drove home with tears blurring the road. But I kept going. I pulled my old art supplies from the back of a closet. Brushes I hadn't used in years, tubes of oil paint. I started small sketches of the river, then portraits from memory. One night, Maxine came over for dinner and stopped when she saw a canvas leaning against the wall. "Did you paint that?" she asked. I nodded. "She looks like you," she said, stepping closer. "But older, wiser." I hadn't realized until then. I'd painted a woman I hadn't met yet, but I was getting there. Work had changed too. Lena pulled me into her office one afternoon and handed me a new title, a small raise, a handwritten note that said, "You've anchored this place." I didn't cry. I just folded the paper and slipped it into my coat pocket. That Sunday, I took a walk alone by the river, sketchpad in hand. The air smelled like pine and warming soil. Spring coming in slow. I found a bench beneath a sycamore tree and sat down to draw. A few families passed, a couple of joggers, and then a voice. "Marilyn." I looked up. Chelsea stood a few feet away, her hands in the pockets of a light coat. She looked different. Or maybe I was seeing her clearly for the first time. "I didn't expect to see you," she said. "I come here often," I replied. She stepped closer. "I'm not here to fight." I didn't say anything. She tugged at her sleeve. "Things aren't great. At home. Mom barely talks. Dad's stuck in the house. The investigation? It's not going well." I nodded once. She took a breath. "I didn't know about the loan," she said. "I didn't know what he did with your name." "I believe you," I said. She looked at the ground. "I said things, did things. I think I was trying to hurt you before you left me. But the truth is, I left you a long time ago." There was a pause, wind moving through the branches overhead. "Do you think we'll ever be okay again?" she asked. I looked back at the river, at how it moved always forward. "I don't know," I said, "but I hope you find a life that's yours." She nodded, turned slowly, and walked away. I didn't call after her. I didn't ask her to stay. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it just means letting go without hate. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with the sun coming through the window in soft, yellow streaks, the kind that touched the floor without making it feel warmer. I opened my laptop not to check emails or job applications this time, but to begin organizing everything. Not just documents for Angela, but the full picture my story laid out line by line. Maxine came by with 2 tote bags full of folders and legal pads. "This one's got your banking records. The rest is blank paper. We'll fill them up." She placed them on the table and pulled out 2 mugs. "We're building a wall now, paper and facts. Let's start there." We worked for hours sometimes without talking, sometimes trading quiet observations. Mortgage payments, dates, screenshots of old group texts where I was asked to just handle it. I printed the screenshots, highlighted bank drafts, noted the times I covered expenses no one else mentioned again. Maxine sat across from me, flipping through pages, circling things, occasionally shaking her head without speaking. By the afternoon, we had 4 binders, one for bills, one for family correspondence, one for shared accounts and unauthorized charges, and one labeled defense. I placed Chelsea's handwritten invoice in the front pocket of that one. Angela called later that day. "We've started the formal investigation into the forged loans," she said. "The district attorney's office has the documents. They're reviewing for criminal charges." I listened, pen in hand, jotting things down as she spoke. "It may take time, but the paper trail's on your side, Marilyn. You've done the right thing by getting ahead of this." That night, I opened the file again, read through every line. I didn't feel angry, just steady, like I had finally planted my feet. The knock came just before 10 the next morning. Not a loud one, just firm. I looked through the peephole before I opened the door. A man stood in a dark jacket badge clipped to his belt. "Detective Alvarez," he said, holding out a card. "May I come in for a few minutes?" I led him to the kitchen table. He sat across from me, opened a small notebook, and placed a recorder on the table. "This is just a preliminary statement," he said, "to clarify your understanding of the loans in question." I nodded. He pressed record. I explained what I knew. When I discovered the second mortgage, how my name had been used, the signatures that weren't mine, the auto drafts I never authorized. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once and closed the notebook. "We've confirmed the documents were processed using identifying information that matches your employment and credit records," he said. "Your name, your social, your digital signature, though the handwriting doesn't match your known legal forms." I didn't say anything. "We've also located a secondary refinance," he added. "Same pattern, same forged signature. If this proceeds, your father may be charged with multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and falsification of financial records." I nodded. "I understand." He stood, thanked me for my time, and said I'd be contacted once the review moved forward. After he left, I sat back down and stared at the empty tea mug on the table. It was chipped on one side from when Maxine knocked it against the sink last month. I ran my thumb over the rim and let the quiet settle. Angela called the next day. "They're moving forward," she said. "Criminal charges are being prepared." There was a long pause on the line. "He's refusing the plea deal." I didn't respond right away. "He says he wants to speak in court. On the record." I exhaled slowly. Let him. The days that followed were slow. I worked, painted, walked. Everything steady, nothing rushed. I met Maxine for dinner at our usual spot by the river. We sat by the window with wine and risotto, and for the first time, I didn't bring up the case. Something's shifted, she said, picking at her bread. I can see it. I think I'm just tired of the noise, I said. I don't need to prove anything anymore. I just want space. She raised her glass. To space, then. A few days later, I received a letter. No return address. The handwriting was tight-slanted but familiar. My father. I waited until the house was quiet, sat down on the sofa, opened the envelope slowly. He didn't start with a greeting, just began mid-thought. I told you at the courthouse that Gloria wasn't your mother. I didn't tell you the rest. I read each line carefully. She resented you, he wrote. She said you reminded her too much of your birth mother. I didn't push her. I should have, but I was afraid of what it would do to the family. And to you. I kept reading. Your real mother's name was Eliza. She passed when you were small. Kind woman. She painted. She wrote letters. I never told you about her. It hurt too much. But I kept everything. Letters. Photos. I held the letter in my lap, let my hands rest there for a moment before continuing. Your aunt. Her sister tried to contact me once, years ago. I never responded. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Her name's Claire. Maybe she's still there. Maybe she'd want to hear from you. That was it. No apology. Just a name. A place. I sat still for a long time. Later that evening, I called Maxine and read her the letter over the phone. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, You should go. I didn't answer right away. You've lived in their version of your story long enough, she said. It's time to find the one that belongs to you. I looked over at the corner where my travel bag sat tucked behind a coat rack. I hadn't used it since the move, but I knew I would. Angela called the next morning with a final update before the next court date. The charges are formal now. 3 counts of financial fraud, 2 for forgery, 1 for identity theft. I asked if he had a lawyer. He does, she said, but he's still saying he wants to address the court himself. No negotiations. When next Thursday. I marked the date, then pulled the travel bag from the corner and laid it open on the bed. If Claire was still in Asheville, I was going to find her. Because now I knew where the story began. I left for Asheville before sunrise. The highway was mostly empty, just me and the hum of the tires and a thermos of black coffee that stayed warm longer than expected. I didn't play music. I just let the sound of the road carry me forward. The directions were simple enough, and I didn't need a GPS until the very end, when the streets narrowed and the trees closed in tighter along the road. Claire's house was small, single-story, tucked behind a line of azaleas that looked like they'd been there for decades. The shutters were faded blue, and there was a wind chime shaped like a sparrow hanging near the porch light. I parked across the street and sat for a minute. Then I got out, walked up the path, and rang the bell. She opened the door slowly, the chain still on. Her eyes moved over me, cautious, curious. I'm Marilyn, I said. Eliza's daughter. The chain slipped loose. She opened the door all the way. She didn't ask how I found her. She didn't ask why I came. She just stepped back and said, Come in. The house smelled like cinnamon and old books. There were paintings on the walls, soft landscapes, wildflowers, the kind of work that felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Claire led me to the kitchen. She poured tea into mismatched cups and sat across from me at the small table, with one hand resting flat on the wood. She wanted to name you Sarah, Claire said after a while. But your dad said Eliza picked that name for every stray cat and baby doll she ever had, so they settled on Marilyn instead. I held the cup in both hands, not sure what to say. She wrote to me, Claire said, reaching for a drawer. She pulled out a stack of old letters folded and worn at the creases. Every month up until she got sick. I kept everyone. She let me read the top few. The handwriting was neat with soft curves. The letters talked about painting in the afternoon, singing to me while I napped little moments that didn't make the photo albums. I read them slowly, letting each line settle. She was kind, Claire said. Gentle, always humming. You were her joy. I stayed through the afternoon. Claire showed me a photograph I'd never seen before, Eliza holding me on a porch swing, her head tilted slightly, smiling at something off camera. There was a calm in that photo I didn't know I'd been missing. When I stood to leave, Claire touched my sleeve. You can come back, she said. Whenever you want. I nodded. I didn't need to say anything. The drive home was quiet. I felt something settle in me. Not closure, not exactly, but something close. I arrived back in town 2 days before the hearing. Angela called to confirm details. Maxine met me at the courthouse steps. Inside, the room was cold, all beige walls and scuffed linoleum. The judge sat high behind the bench, his expression unreadable. My father wore a suit I hadn't seen in years. He looked smaller somehow, shoulders a little hunched. Gloria sat behind him, lips tight, eyes forward. Chelsea wasn't there. The charges were read aloud. Financial fraud, identity theft, forgery. When the judge asked if he wanted to speak, my father stood. He cleared his throat and said, I have nothing to say in my defense. He sat down. That was all. The judge reviewed the charges, then spoke of the consequences, penalties, restitution, possible sentencing. Then he turned to me. Ms. Harper, would you like to make a statement? I stood slowly. My voice was steady. I trusted my family, I said. I paid their bills. I took care of their home. I never expected repayment. I never wanted anything but honesty. The judge nodded. I sat back down. Afterward, Angela said it would be a few weeks before the final ruling. Maxine and I walked outside into the sharp spring air. She didn't say anything, just handed me my coat and started toward the parking lot. That night, I unpacked the photo Claire gave me and placed it on my nightstand. I looked at it for a long time before turning out the light. The next morning, a letter arrived. Plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a single sheet. One line. I see it now. It wasn't signed. The final hearing took place on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was quiet except for the rustle of papers and the low hum of the ceiling fan. Angela sat beside me, organized as always, her notes clipped neatly in front of her. Maxine was behind us, hands folded over her purse. I didn't see Gloria at first. Then I spotted her in the last row, sitting alone, coat still buttoned, her eyes on the floor. The judge entered and took his seat. No gavel, just a sharp look and a quiet voice. Case number 47-812, he said, ruling on the matter of Harper versus Harper. Angela stood and gave a brief summary. Restitution penalties, the scope of the fraud. She didn't add anything extra. She didn't need to. Then the judge spoke directly to my father. You exploited your daughter's trust, he said, voice calm. You used her financial support and name to secure loans and cover personal debts. That was not only illegal, it was a profound betrayal. My father looked down at the table, hands clasped. Given the evidence and the recommendations from both counsel and financial investigators, the judge continued. This court orders the immediate transfer of all jointly held assets back to Ms. Harper. This includes the title to the house, the remaining savings account, and legal ownership of the vehicle currently in Mr. Harper's possession. He paused. In addition, restitution is required in the amount of $86,400. This must be paid within 18 months. Any delay will result in property seizure. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Angela leaned toward me. It's done, she said, quietly. The bailiff dismissed the room. My father didn't move. He sat for a long while after the room emptied his back to me. Gloria walked out without a word. Outside, the clouds had started to break. The breeze had that late spring scent: cut grass, warm pavement, something faintly floral in the distance. Angela shook my hand. Maxine hugged me longer than usual. "You want to come by for dinner?" she asked. "Lasagna night. Maybe tomorrow," I said. I drove out to the house, the one with the green shutters and the porch swing we'd never fixed. It had been 3 weeks since I last saw it. The grass was overgrown. A trash can sat crooked at the end of the drive. A single envelope was tucked in the screen door. Inside, the place was nearly empty. The furniture was gone. The rugs, the pictures, the mismatched dining chairs, all of it. Only a few things remained: the rocking chair in the corner, the ceramic bowl from Mom's old craft fair, one of Chelsea's shoes wedged beneath the hallway bench. I walked room to room, checking for damage. The walls had new scuffs. The bathroom mirror had been removed. The guest room closet was full of hangers, all bare. In my old bedroom, the wallpaper was peeling, where sunlight had hit it daily for years. I stood by the window, listening to the quiet. That night, I didn't sleep there. I locked up and returned to Maxine's. She had a spare pillow waiting on the couch and a slice of chocolate cake covered in foil. We watched the last half of a mystery show and said nothing much. The next day, I met with the locksmith. We changed all 3 locks. Then the contractor came to inspect the siding. "Nothing urgent," he said, "but that gutter's got to be redone." He quoted me a price. I agreed. Then I called a donation service to pick up what was left in the garage. The following week, I had lunch with Angela. She handed me a folder with documents to sign. "You're officially the sole owner," she said. "No more ties." I nodded, signed, and slid the folder back to her. She hesitated, then said, "You handled this with grace. A lot of people would have made noise just for the sake of it." I didn't answer. I just folded my napkin and watched people pass outside the window. Back at the house, I began making small changes. I bought new curtains, painted the kitchen walls soft cream, and hung up the photograph Claire had given me, Eliza, on the porch swing, holding me like the world didn't need anything more. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the front steps, a car pulled up. Chelsea got out, hands in her jacket pockets. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She walked through the entry slowly, her eyes moving from wall to wall. "I saw the court records," she said. "He didn't fight it." "No," I said. "He didn't." She nodded. "I didn't know how deep it went." "You didn't ask." She looked down. "That's fair." We stood in the kitchen a while longer. Then she pulled something from her bag, a manila envelope. "I found these," she said. "Thought you should have them." Inside were old photos. Mom at the church bake sale. Dad holding me on my first day of school. A birthday card in Eliza's handwriting. "I'm sorry," Chelsea said, voice low, "for everything I didn't do." She didn't stay long, just enough time to put the pictures on the counter and walk back out. I didn't ask her to stay. I didn't ask her to explain. Some things don't need answers, just space. I walked into the kitchen the next morning with the soft light coming through the curtains I'd just hung the week before. The ceramic bowl was back on the table, filled with oranges I'd picked up at the farmer's market, and the quiet of the house no longer felt heavy. It felt clean. Settled. The kind of quiet that lets you breathe. The lawyer's paperwork was done. The locks had been changed. The final payment from the restitution order had come through earlier than expected, wired directly from Gloria's account, though she hadn't spoken to me since the hearing. I didn't need her to. I spent most of that spring restoring the garden. I cut back the hydrangeas, repainted the bench, and fixed the stone path that had cracked in the cold. Maxine helped me plant lavender along the fence. One afternoon, while we were mulching the soil, she looked at me and said, "You're standing up straighter these days." I hadn't noticed, but she was right. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how much of myself I'd set aside just to keep peace. I'd let my name be used, my kindness stretched, and my dignity pushed aside, and I did it thinking that love meant keeping quiet. But love isn't silent, and peace isn't something you achieve by disappearing. I saw Chelsea again once at the grocery store. She nodded, gave a small wave. Her cart was full of baby formula and cereal. I waved back. We didn't speak. That was okay. We were both still learning how to live with the space between us. The house slowly became mine again. Not just in paperwork, but in feeling. I hung up a wind chime on the porch, found a faded photo of Mom and Eliza in the garage, and framed it in the hallway. Each little thing reminded me that I had survived what was meant to shrink me, and I hadn't vanished. I'd made room for myself again. I don't think justice always looks like a grand declaration. Sometimes it's a quiet key turning in a new lock. A hot cup of coffee in a home you fought to reclaim. A deep breath without fear. If you've ever had to rebuild from something that tried to take your name, your worth, or your voice, know this. It's not weakness to want peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all. You're allowed to take up space, to speak, to begin again. Thanks for sitting with me through this story. If you've made it this far, I hope it reminded you that even after betrayal, there's still room to come home to yourself. Share it with someone who needs it. And if you're listening from a quiet kitchen of your own, I'm right there with you.